A sensation hits the internet. Recordings of Russia's negotiations with Vitkov have been leaked. Trump's peace plan turned out to be Putin's plan. Abu Dhabi met with Russians in Abu Dhabi. Monsters? The Russians deliberately maim animals to practice providing medical aid to the wounded on them. A factory in Russia that produces components for attack drones has been destroyed. NATO has stated that the war will end in December 2025. Hell at the front. The Russian army has entered the center of Pokrovsk. An unprecedented success for the Ukrainian armed forces. A military factory crucial to Putin has been blown up. Russian drones are attacking Moldova and Romania again. Will there be a response? Putin is furious. China has raised prices on military industrial products for Russia by 87%. Scenes of the apocalypse. An entire district with skyscrapers is on fire in Hong Kong. Hundreds of victims. So you don't get lost in the vastness of YouTube. A global scandal. Secret phone conversations of Steve Witkoff have been leaked online. So this is the very representative of Trump who deals with the Ukraine and Russia issue, who, as reported by American media, together with the Russian envoy Kyrylo Dmitriev, drafted those very 28 points of the so-called peace plan.
I just want you to say, or maybe just tell President Putin directly, because as you know, I have the deepest and utmost respect for President Putin. I truly mean that, and I want to make sure that is very clear.
But Vitkov worked productively not only with Dmitriev, but also with Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov. Bloomberg published a transcript of the conversation between Vitkov and Ushakov from October 14th, where they discussed the transfer of long-range Agavk missiles to Ukraine. Vitkov advised the Russian side to get ahead of Ukraine and talk to Trump in the right tone in order to clarify and secure their positions. And
one more thing. Zelensky will come to the White House on Friday. I know this. I will go to this meeting because they want me to be there. But I think, if possible, we should make a call to our leaders before this Friday meeting. Yes, before, yes. Exactly. All right, okay. I got your advice. So I will discuss this with my supervisor and then get back to you. All right.
On October 16th, Putin and Trump did end up having a phone call. And on October 17th, when President Zelensky met with Trump at the White House, he was denied the transfer of American missiles. The Wall Street Journal sums it up. It was Vitkov who disrupted the deliveries, including the Tomahawks. Bloomberg has at its disposal a transcript of the conversation between the already mentioned Dmitriev and Putin's aide Ushakov from October 29th, where they discussed the peace plan. And here is where it gets most interesting. Judging by the conversation, it is clear that the same plan, or at least most of its points, was written in the Kremlin. And only after that, as they say, this document was sent to Vitkov with the agreement that he would present it as his own.
Dmitriev, no, look, I think we'll just make this document from our side and I'll pass it on informally, emphasizing that all of this is unofficial and let them come up with something of their own. But I don't think they'll accept exactly our version, although at the very least it will be as close as possible. Ushakov, well, that's exactly the point. They might not just say that it was agreed upon with us. That's what I'm afraid of. Dmitriev, no, I will say exactly as you say, word for word. Ushakov, they can twist it later. That's all. There is such a risk. Eat. Well, okay, it doesn't matter. We'll see. Dmitriev, yes, I think you can talk to Steve about this document later. We will do everything carefully. Ooh.
I'm simply speechless. But there is also some good in these films. Authors from international publications write that the publication of the transcript of Vitkov's conversation with the Russians will play into Ukraine's hands, because this is further evidence that the proposed 28 points of the peace plan are Putin's whims. This is the opinion of John Haltiwanger of Foreign Gate Police.
Who leaked the phone records to Bloomberg? Whoever did this may be trying to help Kyiv. After all, these transcripts provide arguments to critics of the plan who call it a capitulation to Russia.
At the same time, reputable publications are puzzling over how Bloomberg managed to obtain the recordings of the conversations. Politico suggests that American intelligence is behind this.
There is a temptation to assume that American intelligence leaked this in order to expose Vitkov's machinations.
There are many unknowns in this equation, but against the backdrop of news about a split within the Trump administration, the publication of the tapes does not seem accidental. NBC News asserts that there are two camps in the White House regarding the war in Ukraine. On one side are Vitkov and Vice President J.D. Vance, and on the other, Secretary of State Marco Rubio.
NBC News writes that the pro-Russian camp of J.D. Vance views Ukraine as the main obstacle to peace. Vance also advocates for the U.S. to pressure Ukraine in order to force it to make peace. Vance's position is supported by U.S. Special Representative Steve Witkoff and U.S. Army Secretary and J.D. Vance's classmate Dan Driscoll. Marco Rubio's position: it is Russia that is to blame for the invasion of Ukraine. Therefore, it is necessary to impose sanctions against Russia so that it yields and stops the war it started. This position is supported by other Trump administration officials within the U.S. diplomatic circle.
It seems that people in Ukraine think the same way. Kyrylo Budanov, advisor to the office of the president, commenting on the Vitkov tapes, stated that he does not consider Vitkov a Russian agent. But Rubio is indeed more constructive.
No, I doubt that anyone in Mr. Trump's administration is playing on the Kremlin side. Another matter is that someone might be thinking about making money together with Russia. We see that these proposals were about earning money jointly. And all members of Trump's team are thinking about how the United States will look, how they will make money. But that's understandable in principle. That is, this is the most important thing for them, and so on. Another point is that there are absolutely professional people, like Mr. Rubio, whom you already mentioned, who look at many things strategically, understanding that you can't, for example, take one part and ignore another. And accordingly, of course, they bring a great deal of constructiveness to any work. But
let's get back to the tapes. Hristo Gruzi raises a logical question in his column for the publication Insider. Will Vitkov be punished?
Vitkov advises a foreign leader on how to manipulate his own president. It's actually interesting whether Trump will now demand formal charges of treason against Vitkov.
By the way, even the US president himself has already commented on his subordinates' tapes. Donald Trump says there's nothing wrong with such discussions because it's just business.
This is a standard story. He has to sell this to Ukraine. He has to sell Ukraine to Russia. It's a matter of deal-making skills. You have to say, they want this. You have to convince them of it. This is a common form of negotiation. I haven't heard the recording, but I was told that these are typical negotiations, and I imagine they said pretty much the same thing to the Ukrainians.
Meanwhile, members of the House of Representatives and Republican John Bacon stated that Vitkov is working for the Kremlin and cannot be trusted to conduct negotiations.
For those who oppose the Russian invasion and want Ukraine to remain a sovereign and democratic country, it is obvious that Vitkov fully supports Russia. He cannot be trusted to conduct these negotiations. Would a Russian paid agent do any worse than him? He should be fired.
Russia, in turn, denies the accusations. Dmitriev himself, the person featured in the recordings, wrote that it was a fake. And Putin's aide, Yuri Ushakov, had this to say.
I often speak with Vitkov, but I don't comment on the content. And as for Dmitriev, I can talk to him. I can talk to anyone on the phone.
Does it have anything in common?
I'm interested. My conversation with Dmitry, will you present it?
I don't know why they're interested in this. Polls in the publication. Why do this, in my opinion? For what purpose?
Probably to interfere. It's unlikely they're doing this to improve relations. Relations are being built now. It's a difficult process. They're being built through these kinds of contacts, like phone calls. I don't know, I really don't. One leaks, another listens in. But not us.
Thank you.
And by the way, regarding this, we don't know who's leaking. There's a theory that it was actually the Kremlin that leaked the conversation between Dmitriev and Vitkov.
The leak of the conversation was very crude. And so that no one would suspect anything, the Russians also leaked the conversation between Ushakov and Dmitriev. The Russians want to disrupt the negotiations using someone else's hands. They failed to do this through the Ukrainians. That's why they're trying to play their favorite game, sowing informational chaos and provoking hysteria among American politicians. They were quite successful at this during the last election campaign. The Russians clearly did not expect such pushback from Trump. Putin doesn't want negotiations, but he's forced to play this game. And to derail the negotiations, a major scandal in the US is required. However, it seems Trump has decided to play this game to the end. And this leak will force Trump to speed up the process.
Interestingly, amid all this, Ushakov announced that as early as next week, Steve Witkoff will visit Russia. In addition, according to Ushakov yesterday in Abu Dhabi, Russian intelligence agencies met with representatives from Ukraine. The publication Axios reported the day before about the participation of the Ukrainian delegation in the US-Russia negotiations, noting that Budanov was present at the meeting. And now, actually, about the updated peace plan. The New York Times writes that the White House is concerned that Russia will reject the peace plan that the US revised with Ukraine in Geneva, as if there's anything to worry about. Russia will reject the plan anyway because it doesn't want peace. It wants Ukraine's capitulation. We've already said that the peace plan is changing and being shortened. The issues that are fundamental for Ukraine are being discussed by the US. Ukraine, on the whole, is ready to agree to most of the points, but is categorically opposed to 3 provisions: limiting the size of the armed forces of Ukraine, renouncing NATO membership, and most importantly, territorial concessions.
All 3 issues, the refusal to reclaim occupied territory, the demilitarization of Ukraine, and its permanent exclusion from NATO, are the most frequently cited reasons by the Kremlin for waging war in Ukraine. Their resolution in Russia's favor is also a key condition set by Moscow for ending its brutal campaign. But all 3 points discussed by the source are also sensitive and long-standing red lines for Ukraine, for which tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have fought and died. Formally stepping back from any of them is a huge ask and potentially carries significant risks for the Ukrainian leadership, which is trying to do so.
Although the size of the Ukrainian armed forces is a matter of debate, on one hand, the Financial Times reports that Kyiv has agreed to reduce the armed forces to 800,000 soldiers. On the other hand, Ukraine's Chief of Staff Andriy Natov, who was present at the negotiations in Geneva, says that the issue of reducing the military was not discussed at all. In the end, all the details of the plan should be discussed at the presidential level. According to the head of the presidential office, Andriy Yermak, President Zelensky is ready to meet with Trump in just 2 days. By the way, it seems that the decision to work based on the American peace plan is final for the Europeans as well. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer, stated that Ukraine's allies have decided not to create an alternative document. And here's another interesting detail. Trump stated that he has not set any deadlines for reaching a peace agreement. I won't even bother to say once again that Trump changes his mind all the time. No deadlines, well, so be it. But at the same time, there is still talk about a possible date. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte believes that the war could end in 2025. And what do you think? Is everything heading toward the end of the war? Because there's more noise around this issue than ever before. Leave your comments. Reading the comments under previous episodes, I see that many of you are watching us from Kazakhstan, Moldova, Europe, and even the USA. We Ukrainians are very grateful for your support and proud to have such reasonable viewers. Let us know in the comments under this episode as well which country you're watching us from and whether people there support our fight against the empire of evil. I always enjoy reading your comments. And now let's continue. Coming up is the most interesting part. Now let's talk about the situation at the front. In Pokrovsk, fighting is taking place not only in the outskirts, but also inside the city itself, as well as on the approaches to Mirnohrad. This was reported by Serhiy Okishev, a representative of the 7th Air Assault Corps.
Right now, all efforts are focused on holding our current positions and preventing the enemy from infiltrating further into the city, both Pokrovsk and now Mirnohrad. Because the enemy's pressure on the city of Mirnohrad has intensified from 2 directions, from the north and from the south. And that is why the defense forces are now increasing their capabilities, building up personnel to defend this agglomeration, including both Pokrovsk and Mirnohrad.
The Deep State portal also reports sightings of Russian Federation armed forces near the railway station in Pokrovsk. Analysts note that there is an increasing number of videos showing occupiers in the central part of the city. This time, a group of Russians is moving from the north, heading south along Mira Avenue. In addition, the Russians have become more active and are making gains in the Siversk area. This is again being reported by Deep State analysts.
We are trying to fully understand the situation in the Siversk area, but the occupiers have found weak spots and are actively pressing there, which usually leads to negative consequences.
And now to the good news. Thanks to our modernized drones, long-range artillery and other strike capabilities, we have managed to significantly reduce Russian attempts to storm the Pokrovsk direction using heavy armored vehicles. The Russian breakthrough in the Slobozhansk direction has also been stopped. This was reported by the 8th Special Operations Forces Regiment. Aerial reconnaissance detected the movement of enemy assault groups. First, FPV drones struck the enemy. After the airstrike, the enemy assault troops tried to hide in groves and buildings. However, another group of our soldiers was already waiting for them there. Meanwhile, in the Lyman direction, pilots of the 3rd Army Corps destroyed a heavy flamethrower system, the Solent Sepyok. Millions of dollars in damage and a rocket salvo detonation, all thanks to an FPV drone costing just a few $100s and the invaluable work of the pilots from the 63rd Mechanized Brigade. Well, they're just awesome. And finally, a story that personally amazed me beyond words. A video is now actively circulating online showing Russian instructors teaching their soldiers how to pack wounds on animals that were deliberately injured beforehand. Because of YouTube's rules, we can't show you these videos, but in the footage available online, you can see that the animals the Russians are practicing on are still alive, but slowly dying in terrible agony. I simply have no words. This is Putin's army. I can hardly imagine how anyone could even come up with something like this. We live in the 21st century, but it seems the Russians are living in some kind of primitive society. I never cease to admire the courage and heroism of Ukrainian warriors. They are holding the front and standing up to a huge horde that vastly outnumbers them. That's why I urge you to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And if you can't do so financially, write them words of encouragement in the comments. I know they're watching us.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
4 drones entered Moldova and Romania. Zelensky spoke about the consequences of Russia's attack on Ukraine and called for increased pressure on Russia. At the same time, the situation at the front is extremely tense. Details in our military review.
One of the longest and most massive since the start of the full-scale war. This is how the head of the Krasnodar region, Veniamin Kondratyev, described the nighttime attack on his region. Drones also visited the Russian city of Taganrog in the Rostov region. An aircraft manufacturing plant was attacked there. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed the destruction of a Russian experimental AS-60 aircraft as well as a drone manufacturing facility.
This aircraft is equipped with laser equipment, and it is the only one of its kind in the Russian aerospace forces. That is why this is unprecedented. In terms of the success of the Ukrainian Defense Forces' strike on legitimate military targets on the territory of the occupying country.
In addition, in Novorossiysk, Russia, an oil terminal was hit. Stenders and a launcher from an S-400 SAM warehouse were hit. The Tuapse oil refinery was hit.
Let me remind you of the tactical and technical characteristics of BAR. It's about 700 kilometers. The range for hitting a target, the warhead, is between 50 and 100 kilograms. The length of the Neptune and the range for hitting a target is about 1,000 kilometers. Therefore, striking legitimate military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation is yet another proof of the successful work of the Ukrainian defense industry.
It's not safe even in the Russian digital space. Ukrainian hackers broke into the alert system in Krasnodar Krai, which resulted in the activation of chemical and radiation alarms there. Instead of defending their own regions, the Russian army was firing at Ukrainians. A video appeared online showing at least 8 Caliber missiles being launched from Novorossiysk towards Ukraine. The waves.
They're flying, the 8th one has gone. The Tsars are flying over there. The Tsars were bringing out the missiles.
At the same time, the Russians attacked residential buildings where peaceful people were sleeping. The president of Ukraine stated that the enemy struck several regions of our country, but the epicenter was Kyiv. According to him, the occupiers sent more than 460 drones into Ukraine, 4 of which entered Moldova and Romania.
Such attacks should be regarded as targeting not only the territory of Ukraine, but also accordingly against the territories of Moldova and Romania, as a tactic of the Russian Federation at a time when the stakes are raised during crucial international meetings.
The situation along the line of contact remains tense. The occupying army is trying to break through in Pokrovsk.
Ukrainian defense forces managed to carry out a sweep almost in the city center. We are talking about the successful actions of Ukrainian assault units in the area of the Pokrovsk Pedagogical College, Soborna Square, and the railway station. In addition, Ukrainian defense forces have expanded their presence both in Pokrovsk itself and accordingly have carried out a number of successful counterattacks.
The defenders on the Kupiansk axis are not allowing the occupiers to break through the Ukrainian defenses. Here in Russia, they are trying to break through with small assault groups, but they are immediately suppressed by the Ukrainian armed forces. Our defenders are employing active defense tactics on the Zaporizhzhia front and seize every opportunity to launch counterattacks.
In the city of Cheboksary, Ukrainian defense forces carried out a strike on a plant producing navigation equipment and components for cruise and ballistic missiles. It is known that a strike and fire were recorded on the territory of the Veneer Progress enterprise. Later, the attack was confirmed by the Ukrainian General Staff.
The Veneer Progress plant manufactures receivers and antennas for GLONASS, GPS and Galileo satellite systems, including Cometa-type modules used in Shahed-type kamikaze drones, as well as in Iskander-M and Kalibr missile systems and UEM modules. The extent of the damage is being clarified.
The General Staff also reported on the operation of drones in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine.
In addition, Ukrainian drones in the settlement of Vasilivka, in the temporarily occupied territory of Zaporizhzhia region, struck the command post of one of the units of the 58th Combined Arms Army of the Russian Federation, a Tor M1 surface-to-air missile system in Mariupol, brigade-level ammunition depots in Vosheretina and Kamensy in the temporarily occupied territory of Donbas, as well as a location where enemy personnel were concentrated in the Pokrovsk direction.
But that's not all the news about strikes on Russia and the unprecedented success of the Ukrainian armed forces. The most important military factory for Putin has blown up. Details in our report.
Key military and energy facilities of the Russian Federation are under attack. In just one attack, the Russians lost an aircraft repair plant, a drone manufacturing facility, an oil terminal, an oil refinery, an S-400 air defense system, and the cherry on top, the experimental A-60 laser aircraft, which Russia will no longer be able to recreate.
It's blazing so fiercely that, God forbid, the glow looks as if it's after a nuclear explosion.
Residents of Taganrog witnessed this glow. It was extremely hot there on Monday night into Tuesday, especially in the area of the Beriev aircraft repair plant. The enterprise specializes in the development, serial production, modernization, and repair of amphibious aircraft and special-purpose aviation complexes, particularly the A-50 long-range radar detection and control aircraft. The aircraft plant also carries out major overhauls of Russian aviation aircraft and upgrades strategic Tu-95 MSM missile-carrying bombers. Next to the enterprise is the main test base of the plant, the Taganrog-Yuzhny military airfield. Rare units of Russian aviation equipment are stored at this location.
Yes, an airplane.
More precisely, rare units of Russian aviation equipment used to be stored here. At the airbase, an A-60 aircraft, also known as the Flying Laboratory, was hit. This aircraft was intended for testing laser weapons. It is a Soviet development. The project was developed in the 1970s. As part of the USSR's strategy to create anti-satellite laser weapons, the aircraft is distinguished by a distinctive hump. It is in this hump that a 1-megawatt laser installation is located. The idea was that this laser could either jam the optical devices of enemy satellites or even damage their sensors and other equipment. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the project was frozen. But the Russians brought it back from the dead and spent years trying to breathe new life into it. At the same time, they never missed a chance to threaten the world with their so-called unparalleled weapons.
The Russian army will soon be equipped with a Star Wars-style weapon, capable of burning the enemy both on the ground and in the air.
The Soviets developed only 2 such aircraft, so the destruction of one is not just a painful blow to Putin's ambitions, but a devastating one. The Russians will no longer be able to recreate their flying laboratory. And the Z-Patriots know this as well.
They've never heard of protective shelters before deployment. It will soon be 4 years since the start of the special military operation. The idiotic internet shutdowns didn't help either against enemy UAVs, which are controlled in part by satellite communication systems, or against local residents filming footage of the strikes. Probably a more effective measure would have been to relocate the aircraft from a region that is under enemy UAV attacks almost every day. But
it's not at all certain that these were drone strikes. The Ukrainian General Staff stated that they used Bars drones and Neptune cruise missiles to strike Russian strategic targets.
Whoa! Oh my gosh, something just hit. Damn, seriously.
During the strike on Taganrog, the Molnia UAV manufacturing facility by land-air was also hit. Fires have been reported at the site, according to the military. But it wasn't just Taganrog. Explosions were also widely heard in the Krasnodar region. The strikes targeted the Sheskari's oil terminal in Novorossiysk and the Tuapse oil refinery. In Novorossiysk, oil storage tanks and one of the S-400 air defense system launchers were damaged, according to the General Staff. The extent of the damage is being clarified.
Ukraine may receive $5 billion in military aid from its partners. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says that by the end of the year, Ukraine will receive approximately $5 billion in military aid under the PRU support program.
We are on track to deliver all the weapons to Ukraine. But this is not only about the PRL initiative. There is also the Czech initiative for ammunition, as well as efforts by Lithuania and Denmark to purchase defense industry equipment in Ukraine.
It's important to note that POREL is a joint program between the US and NATO, which allows Ukraine to receive American weapons funded by partner countries that are NATO members.
Extremely important equipment is being delivered to Ukraine. European countries have made a significant contribution over the past few years, but there are certain capabilities that only the US can provide. Trump agreed to have Canada and European allies fund American weapons.
As the saying goes, there's no money, but hang in there. Or as Russia enters the so-called phase of tax hangover. In fact, the Russian Ministry of Finance is now openly admitting that without raising VAT, as well as environmental, recycling and other fees, the budget simply can't be balanced. Reserves are depleted, regions are drowning in debt, and the National Wealth Fund is almost empty.
Russians are already joking that they'll start taxing the air. Jokes aside, they're actually discussing an environmental fee, which is basically a tax on air. The recycling fee will be significantly increased. Life there will become increasingly difficult for citizens. Protests have already started specifically against the recycling fee, because everyone buys cars. And if you buy a car, you have to pay the government for its disposal right away. But you're not going to dispose of it immediately, are you? But you'll have to pay the money up front. They wanted to introduce it on November 1st, but because of the protests, they postponed it to December 1st.
More and more holes in the already patched-up budget of the Russian Federation are being plugged with so-called hidden emissions. The central bank is essentially printing rubles for state banks, which then use this money to massively buy up government bonds, through which Moscow borrows money from the very same Russian banks. But the main question isn't just about the budget deficit, but about how long Russia, given this situation, can continue to wage war.
Many people say that Russia will be able to hold on forever, but I don't think this story will last very long. The most interesting developments will come on January 1st, 2026, when new sanctions take effect. Europe is gradually stopping its purchases of liquefied natural gas. And in 2027, pipeline gas will be phased out, with all contracts fully terminated on January 1st, 2028. And that's far from all. The Kremlin still has a lot of bad news ahead. It's like the Germans in World War I, who, as the joke went back then, could already see Paris through their binoculars, but at that very moment, they ran out of money.
Britain is ready to participate in the EU project to provide Ukraine with funding based on Russia's frozen assets. This was announced by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer during an online meeting of the Coalition of the Resolute. He emphasized that even while working towards peace, support for Ukraine must not be weakened, so that Ukraine can continue its fight. Meanwhile, Politico reports that European countries are developing a plan B in case they are unable to agree on the use of the Russian Federation's frozen assets.
European countries are working on an emergency plan B to ensure that Ukraine does not run out of funds at the beginning of next year if they fail to reach an agreement on seizing Russia's frozen assets to finance Kyiv's military efforts. At a summit a month ago, EU leaders hoped to agree on a proposal to use Moscow's frozen reserves to provide Ukraine with a reparations loan of 140 billion euros. But this idea is still, understandably, met with a considerable amount of caution and careful deliberation in Belgium, which is notably the country where the vast majority of Russian assets are currently being held. According to information provided by 4 different officials familiar with the ongoing discussions, one of the options that is gradually gaining more and more support is the introduction of an interim loan, which would be financed through borrowing by the European Union. This measure is intended to help keep Ukraine financially afloat and stable during the crucial first months of the year 2026. This would allow additional time to carefully prepare a full reparations loan using Russian assets, in a way that Belgium can handle and would provide a long-term solution.
For now, discussions continue within the EU, and there is still no final decision on this issue. China is fleecing Russia like a sticky tree, or maybe a birch tree. Here's a concrete case. Amid import restrictions due to sanctions, Chinese exporters are raising prices for Russian buyers of military-industrial products, taking advantage of the Kremlin's dependence on their supplies. Prices for Chinese products whose exports are controlled have increased for Russians by an average of 87%. This is according to a study by the Bank of Finland's Institute for Emerging Economies. Details on how China is ripping off Russia. Next.
China is betraying Russia. Yes, you heard that right. Beijing skillfully pretends to be a partner, but in reality uses Moscow as the weak link.
And in our country, there's a phrase that has become a catchphrase. Russians and Chinese are brothers forever. But
here's what's interesting. Recently, Xi spoke on the phone with Trump and stated that he supports the United States' peaceful efforts to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It sounds nice in words, but what about in practice? I
think that China has sent a political signal to the United States, indicating that it is closely watching what is happening along the track of peaceful settlement and the search for tools for a peaceful resolution of the Russia-Ukraine war. The main point and the most important aspect of this signal should be the following. It is absolutely essential that Russia must not win this war under any circumstances, and accordingly, Ukraine simply cannot afford to lose.
But here's something else. The leaders of the countries have agreed on visits, and Trump is planning to go to China as early as April.
Whether Trump will be able to reach the desired trade agreement with China, specifically in April, for example, during a potential meeting in Beijing, is a big question. As far as I can see, there's nothing deeper here, especially regarding the end of the Russia-Ukraine war. Within these time frames, April 2026, a meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump in Beijing, there's nothing of the sort. But
what exactly is China doing wrong in relation to Russia? Everything seems to be fine, doesn't it? The thing is, China is making a lot of money off Russia. The prices of export goods supplied to Russia have increased by an average of 87%.
Relations between Russia and China have always been very complicated. And if we think they are friends, no, there's actually a good word for this, they are fellow travelers. Russia and China are fellow travelers. A weak Russia is beneficial to China, and a weak Putin is beneficial to China as well. It's advantageous for China to buy raw materials cheaply, and then to sell goods to the Russian Federation at very high prices. Russia basically has no other way out anymore.
And it's not just about goods. China is gradually entering Russian regions, thereby gaining access to territories and resources.
You know, there are already examples in the Far East where small settlements have become predominantly Chinese, and now they even participate in municipal elections there.
As a result, everyone is becoming increasingly dependent on China.
And does Putin like this kind of relationship? Again, of course not. Of course he doesn't like it. Well, because Putin has phantom pains about the Soviet Union. Basically, throughout his entire presidency, he has tried to restore some kind of lost greatness. He calls himself the gatherer of Russian lands. But in reality, he is simply leading the Russian Federation to disaster. To complete absolute disaster, to financial bankruptcy.
Beijing is increasingly strengthening its influence in Central Asia, while pushing Moscow into the background, which likely cannot help but worry the old man in the Kremlin.
It is necessary to unwaveringly strengthen the friendship between China and Kazakhstan. to make joint efforts to promote comprehensive cooperation and to make a greater contribution to peace in the region and the world, as well as to the development, stability, and positive energy of China-Kazakhstan relations.
Here is the main question. What exactly is driving China? A true partnership with Russia?
Our close and ongoing communication clearly reflects the highly strategic and mutually beneficial nature of Russian-Chinese relations, which, as we know, are at an unprecedentedly high level.
Or is Beijing simply taking advantage of the situation and acting in its own interests?
They are not interested in the Russian Federation winning this war. Because if Putin wins this war, he restores his geopolitical agency. He starts talking to all the players, for example, with the United States and China, on an equal footing, which is absolutely strategically does not align with China's interests. Yes, this position is hidden.
China talks about friendship, but only acts when it benefits them. It profits from Russia, strengthens its own influence, and at the same time builds relations with the US. And Moscow is becoming increasingly dependent on Beijing's decisions. In
Hong Kong, a massive fire has engulfed a residential complex. The Guardian reports that a severe fire has swept through the bamboo forests of a residential area. 3 residential blocks are engulfed in flames. Police are evacuating neighboring blocks as the flames continue to spread to other buildings. As of now, 4 deaths have been reported, while the number of people trapped inside the buildings remains unknown.
Hong Kong authorities have confirmed that 9 people were taken to the hospital as a result of the incident. Unfortunately, 4 of them have died, 3 are in critical condition, and only 1 injured person is in stable condition. Among those injured are firefighters who took part in extinguishing the blaze, according to Reuters correspondents.
How do you like our news? Let us know what we should change to become better. We will definitely take your feedback into account. In the meantime, please like this video to support what we do. And be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss future episodes. See you soon.